Hello everyone and welcome to this episode. This time we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of games from the Sega CD or Mega CD that have actually caught my eye over the years. I've never really had any nostalgia for this system and I've never really wanted to seek it out as part of the collection, but there are just a few games that have caught my eye that really show off what the system was potentially capable of. This has resulted in me wanting to make this video. If you enjoyed this content, then please take a moment out of your time to like, share and subscribe to the channel, as well as check out my pretty substantial back catalogue at this point. I think that most will agree that on the whole the Mega CD was a failure for Sega, and it felt like a bit of a playing catch-up situation for Sega as far as goes the power of the Super Nintendo and to dominate market share over other CD add-ons such as the PC Engine CD, which was particularly successful in Japan, but it was essentially Sega admitting that there was much more powerful systems out there and that the old trusty Mega Drive needed a life support machine. Now don't get it twisted, I am a huge, almost biased fan of the Sega Mega Drive, and I really just don't think they needed to do this at this specific time. And I think it was the very start of Sega diminishing its brand. The Mega CD was really expensive for the consumer. In the UK here it retailed at £270 on top of already having to own a Mega Drive. And it ended up way overusing the full motion video games in my opinion, leaving very little interaction with the action itself. Another significant issue was just bog standard Sega Mega Drive games being ported over to the system with at most a CD soundtrack. The cheaper CD format made these all too easy for companies to produce. Over the years of retro gaming, I've finally managed to put together a list of games big enough for a video that actually are worth mentioning. I am genuinely really impressed with these titles, and it kind of upsets me that Sega didn't produce more of this kind of content for the Mega CD. I think they missed the opportunity to bring a lot of content genuinely groundbreaking to the system. So here are a bunch of visually impressive Mega CD games which showed real promise for the system. Batman Returns. If you forget about the half of the game which is basically a standard port of the rather poor Batman Returns on the Sega Mega Drive, unlike most Mega CD ports that is only half the story here. Added are numerous visually impressive vehicular levels involving the Batmobile and Bat Ski Boat. These great and action-packed sections prove that so much more could have been done with the hardware. This kind of scaling surely could have been utilised better. I mean, where the hell is Sega's own Super Scaler arcade ports for this system? Imagine at this time having Mega CD versions of Outrun, Afterburner and Space Harrier, just to name the obvious choices. I think the cutscene of Batman driving the Batmobile is still super impressive to this day. It looks so great and doesn't rely on horrendous quality clips from the movie. The CD soundtrack is obviously an improvement too, but compared to other Mega CD port, this one practically adds a whole new game that celebrates the new hardware so well. Final Fight CD. At the time, nothing came close to being such a faithful port of this Capcom classic arcade brawler. The Super Nintendo did it first, but that was a solo play experience only, with a choice of only 2 of the 3 characters. It was a bit of a crime against the arcade classic, to be honest, to release the game, and definitively call it Final Fight really. This version adds both 2 players and the Guy character back into the game, as well as remixing the soundtrack into CD quality and voice acted cutscenes, making it an improvement over the arcade in that sense. This soundtrack is stunning. There is still a little bit of a limit to the enemies on screen similar to the SNES version, but all of the SNES censorship have been returned to their original state. So back to the beating down of female looking sprites it is then, albeit with them wearing slightly less revealing tops and skirts. Road Avenger is actually one of the only full motion video games that I have on this list, but I think that this one just looks most visually impressive. I think it's due to it all being in an animation style, so the choppiness just comes across as less frames of animation. These car chase scenes also just seem to work great from a gameplay standpoint as well. All you are doing is following on-screen prompts to hold certain buttons at certain times, but it's surprisingly immersive, and actually while capturing this gameplay I got lost in it. This is a great game and the best example of what the Mega CD went with all too often, unfortunately with a lot less impressive results on the whole. Slipheed is an impressive and in a lot of ways groundbreaking shoot 'em up really. It all in all has kept the gameplay of traditional games in the vertical shooter genre at the time, but added a simple oblique viewing angle where enemies are smaller the further away they are, but bigger as they come close. There are amazing 3D polygonal visuals which before I did the research for this I didn't even realise were pre-rendered, creating huge space battle backgrounds to really make you feel like you're part of the bigger picture of the battle. The Secret of Monkey Island is a point-and-click adventure from the sublime at the time LucasArts. The sheer character and humour of this game shines through, and it really enhances an already impressively visual game, which until this time was only really ever seen on the PC. This game is nicely accessible compared to other point-and-click adventures of the time. The sound and soundtrack, as well as the lovingly animated scrolling and cutscenes, are highlights which really elevate this title to being a really impressive game on the Mega CD. Snatcher is an early game from the legendary Hideo Kojima of Metal Gear Solid fame. It is a very story-focused, borderline interactive novel, but at the time nothing like this have ever been seen in the video game landscape. This has a very deep story with impressive visuals, despite the interactions being a bit slow and limited. You are hooked into the narrative and the shooting sections keep your attention to an extent on the action front. This game's story is heavily influenced by movies such as Blade Runner, Invasion of the Body Snatchers and The Terminator. It's a bit hard to play through nowadays as it's all a bit slow and the limited action is pretty hard to stomach, but it is impressive in story, scope and the voice acting alone, something not really seen in games of this time. Sonic CD started as a simple port of the original Sonic game but ended up developing into a separate entity with much more depth and scope than any Sonic game that we'd seen up to this time. A time travel and exploration version of Sonic. If you beat the game proper, then you have to time travel to past versions of each stage in order to create a better future. Failing to do so in each stage will give you a Back to the Future Biff Tannen style bad future. Very creative stuff. The Mode 7 style bonus round also really impresses. No matter where you play it, this has a stunning soundtrack. The Japanese original is generally thought of as better, but the intentions of the international release was to improve it even more. Both soundtracks are stunning, to be honest. The FMV intro really brings this game up a level in impressiveness as well. This Sonic game feels much more colourful and uses the colour really well thematically compared to other Sonic games of the time. Soul Star is another really impressive superscalar style game that looks absolutely stunning. This time in the form of a space shooter or mech shooter. Why oh why didn't Sega do their best possible ports of their most impressive arcade games on this system at the time? it could have still been really relevant. Leaving these impressive ports until the 32X and even the Sega Saturn at times with the advent of 3D polygons was just too late. Anyway, Soulstar is brilliant fun, check it out. Be warned though, this game has a steep learning curve, but come on, look at it, it's mighty impressive. Star Wars Rebel Assault. This is a Star Wars game that really made you feel like you were part of the movie as a rebel fighter at the time of its release. Not so impressive now, but at the time it blended the FMV game model seamlessly with a more traditional video game in the sense of controlling the action. Something that many FMV games at the time sorely lacked. This game even utilises pre-rendered 3D assets at times, very impressive for a Sega CD game, but ultimately it doesn't hold up today. Nor was it really the best port of the game to play at the time. The proper sounds from the actual movie and soundtrack really help with the immersion though. The Terminator. This is really one for me, with the extremely flawed and cripplingly short Mega Drive version of this game being one of my absolute favourite guilty pleasure games. I can always get some fun out of it. I spent a long time craving to play the much higher praised Mega CD version, and when I finally got round to emulating this game, I wasn't disappointed. A much longer and fleshed out representation of the game all round. The stages look fantastic and are lengthy. The chunkier sprites are much more detailed and are animated great with smooth running animation from the main sprite of Kyle Reese. The soundtrack from Tommy Tallarico is really some of his best work and probably my favourite soundtrack on the system. Crunchy guitar riffage over techno works wonderfully here. The only criticisms I could possibly give is that it's a little repetitive in its running and gunning action, and the FMV clips from the movie are very rough. I'm really glad I got to play this one though. It's a much more fleshed out game that feels much more like the excellent RoboCop vs Terminator than the original Mega Drive game. Thunderhawk. Although it looks pretty rough now, at the time this helicopter 3D free roaming shooter title was way ahead of its time. This is a very impressive action title for the system. This felt so realistic and varied, and the Gulf War style missions made it one of the best and most sought after games for the system, especially here in the UK. If you were already a fan of the Desert Strike games, then this felt like a massive generational leap, truly groundbreaking. So there you have it. Maybe the Mega CD wasn't so bad after all, but I wasn't really ever considering picking it up at the time or even now as a retro video game collector. The prices are just too hot for me. I think the best time to buy this is just after it was deemed a failure and the horizon was set for the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. I think you probably could have picked it up fairly cheap then, although it was still quite a rare machine here in the UK. With that said, it was a really bold and really intriguing system at the time. I genuinely think we thought that FMV gaming was going to be the future at that point. Now that on its own makes me thankful for the early 3D polygonal games on its own. With all that said, what a moment in time from a very brave company that were willing to push the boundaries, even potentially to its own detriment. I think that there are enough good games here to at least emulate the system, and I've really enjoyed making this video. Please comment down below on any other Mega CD games or Sega CD games that you think I should check out. Until next time, much love, please look after yourselves and each other and get your geek on with Jig Retro.